Hey everybody, Nick Espinosa, your chief security fanatic here, and today we are actually talking about military invasions because cyber attacks are becoming a core strategy for military invasions. Here's what's going on. This is coming from CPO Magazine. Now, you would think that this would be just, well, yeah, Nick, duh, we live in the age of the internet, so of course there's going to be cyber attacks, but they're getting very specific on this. They are ramping up in a way that we haven't seen before, and this is what we're actually going to be talking about. So I'm sure I'm going to hear comments of people that just read the headlines and was like, well, yeah, duh, but here we are. Let's get going. Now, the conflict between Russia and Ukraine is where we're talking about here, and this is obviously leading to border tensions, but the United States and British intelligence both think that coordinated cyber attacks are much more likely going to be the opening move than the actual physical invasion of, let's say, the Russian military or whatever cutouts they're using this time are going to go ahead and invade the Ukraine. Now, the New York Times also reports that the United States and UK have dispatched cyber warfare advisors to Ukraine to prepare for potential attacks. The prospect is not unprecedented as Russia disabled Ukraine power stations last time tensions between these two countries escalated. I actually wrote about this for my previous publisher. Essentially, this was a huge thing. I've talked about this at length on stage as well. Now, Russian hackers have previously turned the lights off in Ukraine in both 2015 and 2016. Again, I've talked about this as part of the long-running conflict between these two nations. While Russia has moved roughly 175,000 troops to the border of Ukraine in this most recent escalation, the most likely opening hostilities would be a similar wave of cyber attacks. Now, American intelligence agencies believe that the strategy is more than just simple harassment. Outages of essential services like utilities and banking could be used by Russia to delegitimize the Ukrainian government and potentially provide cover, basically, for their invasion, essentially creating a cover story saying, oh, well, the government is destabilized, we are going to come in and stabilize the government, and here we are. The current conflict is tied to the formation of a separatist group that wants to see Ukraine abandon its Western alliances and align with Russia's political interests. And there have been some really interesting articles and studies done on this about how Putin would like to revive the Soviet Union under his leadership, obviously not calling it the Soviet Union. Now, while Russia has consistently engaged in some amount of cyber attacks against Ukraine in recent years, American officials say that these efforts have been ramping up since the beginning of December with an active campaign against assorted Ukraine government agencies and the electrical grid in the country. U.S. officials also remain unsure if Russia really intends to engage in a quote-unquote hot war invasion of Ukraine. Putin's strategy may simply be limited to cyber attacks with the intention of paralyzing the country's infrastructure, creating conditions for them to basically install a Russian-friendly government. Russia faces global sanctions at minimum if it were to physically cross the border and invade, and also risks the possibility of an armed response by the United States and other Ukraine allies. Essentially, what we're talking about here is the Russians can essentially not figure out these sanctions, or rather not have these sanctions leveled upon them, if they can basically say, well, we didn't cyber attack them, we don't know what's going on, it wasn't us, we didn't invade, no Russian troops set foot in Ukraine soil, here we are. The Russian cyber attack avenue is also much easier for Russia due to countries sharing the electrical grid that was developed while both of them were members of the Soviet Union. There's a lot of intertying there of these kinds of infrastructures that still exists today. Russia has extensive knowledge of Ukraine's systems, given that it basically still makes most of the parts and elements that Russia developed. Interestingly enough, the type of reactor, on a tangent to this, that was Chernobyl, there's still about 20 of those, 15 to 20 of those still in use, in existence in Eastern Europe and Russia. And this is essentially a Russian invention that they are continuing to maintain. And there you go. These were very cheaply made power plants, for lack of a better term. That's one of those reasons why Chernobyl was such a big disaster. And we are still actually seeing ramifications of that right now, because, again, the radiation is not going away for thousands and thousands of years. And Chernobyl is facing a bit of an issue right now, if you've been reading on this, which I found absolutely fascinating. Now, the 2015 cyber attack on Ukraine, which turned the power off to numerous neighborhoods. Something like 80,000 people, if I recall my writing, were basically affected by this. This shutting off came during Christmas when the utility companies had skeleton crews on duty. That's a very common time for cyber attacks to hit. In the cybersecurity community, we know that when essentially we've got 2 weeks leading up to Christmas and then Christmas to New Year's and a little beyond where, a lot of people are off duty, everything is kind of spun down, not much business gets done, those kinds of things. And here we are, and we get a call of we get a whole bunch of ransomware calls from new clients, during this period. And unfortunately, 2021 was no different than 2020 or 2019 or 2018, et cetera, et cetera. American officials, for the record, coming back to this, also believe that if a similar attack is forthcoming, it will happen in early January after the regionally popular Orthodox Christmas, which happens after the traditional Western Catholicism Christian Christmas. So there you go. That is essentially what we have on the board. It makes sense, I think, logically for Russia to continue to use its cyber prowess, and it does have cyber prowess to destabilize Ukraine, which could then possibly give them a justification, one, to either sway the population through a massive disinformation campaign like we've seen here and in other countries. I've written extensively on that for Forbes over the years. We may actually see something similar happen in Ukraine, and then you have this disinformation that comes out there that says, the Ukraine's current government cannot do this. President Zelensky cannot maintain control and stability, so vote for pro-Putin whatever, without actually saying pro-Putin. We see these things coming from Russia all the time. Don't fool yourself. They are happening here as well in the United States. So by virtue of that, we may not actually see a hot war. This may simply be posturing and giving cover to their cyber intrusions as they slowly destabilize or run cyber attacks against that country to essentially destabilize them and get a pro-Russian government running Ukraine. So we'll see what happens. That is your news of the day. It's not just, well done, Nick, this is happening. No, this is actually moving forward. There's a lot of different balls in the air here, and there's a lot of different reasons to do this. It's not just making the enemy deaf and blind, which is part of Warfare 101. If we can cripple the enemy by essentially turning off the lights and killing a communications infrastructure, when we invade, we're going to have a much more effective chance of successfully conquering whatever we're invading because they're deaf and blind. We are talking about way beyond that right now in terms of destabilizing an entire nation in the interest of political machinations to replace the government. That is above and beyond. That is becoming normal. We are seeing that around the world, and some could argue we're even seeing it here. And please like, share, follow me here on Facebook and Twitter at NickAESP. And please feel free to subscribe to me at YouTube as well. And as always, stay safe, stay online, and please stay private. Thanks, everyone.